minute now. So we should, I think, once in the chat, Mona lets us know we are live. We should technically get into the session mode.
Okay.
We are
Do I
live.
have my video on?
Sorry, ma'am. Can you come again?
Should I keep my video on or off?
Yes, please. That'll be nice. Abhay, I think we should keep our videos off.
Yes,
Off?
we are live now, I think. So I'm going to turn my video off as well.
Good morning, everyone. Namaste, namaskara from Bengaluru. My name is Vikram. I will be the moderator and host for the session today, and bang on time, we'll get started. We are getting started now. Thank you all the participants who are joining in today for this interesting panel discussion, which we are hosting as a part of the Innovate for Cities 2021 conference. For all the people joining in from the rest of the world, thank you for joining in. For all the participants from India and Bangalore, a very good morning. Thank you for joining us. A little bit of about the Innovate for Cities. The Innovate for Cities conference is a virtual global and regional event which brings together essentially elements of discussion around science and innovation, policy and practice with a very common objective. How do you enable cities to take accelerated and ambitious climate action, essentially? So we are all living in a world when the impact of climate change cannot be ignored, and the cities that we live in bear the brunt of that. So the conference really looks at opportunities to build cleaner, resilient, sustainable and fairer cities across the globe. And today we are speaking from Bangalore, one of the fastest growing cities in India, probably one of the key representatives of all the themes which Innovate for Cities conference represents. So I welcome you all once again. This conference is organized by UN Habitat and the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. My sincere thanks to the organizers for giving us an opportunity to host one of the panel discussions in this conference. I would highly recommend all participants to check out the detailed program of the conference. It's been running since yesterday. It's going on till 15th of this month. There are various interesting tracks. Lots of different interesting conversations from across the globe. So I would highly recommend you all to check it out. My name is Vikram Rai. I am a founding member of the Flourishing Bengaluru Collective. We are an emergent new collective from the city of Bengaluru, comprising of multiple diverse non-profit organizations and groups, as well as individuals, including many lawyers, scientists, public health experts, technology, media professionals, climate activists, educators, and civic action groups. We came together with one unified purpose. We believe that, like many other cities in the global south, Bengaluru is in a unique position today, faces a very interesting, challenging mix of aspirations, opportunities, disruptions, and uncertainty. And of course, looming behind all these developments is the climate change impact and the likely transformations it will bring about. So as a collective, we are looking at understanding the principles of adaptive local governance, interventions that leverage technology, media interest, and citizen action to solve some of these challenges facing our city. So we are a fairly nouveau collective, a bunch of people with common roots to Bengaluru. We believe that we can also work together with multiple other experts, civic organizations, the government, etc., to look at the next few years of shaping the vision for Bengaluru. So we are the hosts for this panel discussion today. Just a quick check on participants. Great. We have a stellar panel today of participants who are joining this conversation today. I'll very soon have an opportunity to introduce them all, but very quickly, Mr. Gaurav Gupta, thank you for joining in. Good morning, sir. Mrs. Katyayani Chamaraj, good morning. Thank you for joining, ma'am, taking your time out. Dr. Champakar Raj Gopal, thanks. Thank you so much for joining in. Hope to see a lot of inputs coming in from you. Samir Sisodia, thank you for joining in. Looking forward to a lot of interesting insights from you. I'll do a more detailed introduction to all our panelists today, and we are looking forward to hear from them. But a little bit about today's panel discussion, theme of the panel discussion, in context to the I4C theme itself. We are calling this panel discussion and the theme around this as integrating decentralized solutions for climate change adaptation in Indian cities, with a very specific context and focus on Bangalore, because that is the city we are speaking today from. But in general, also looking at the general fabric of Indian cities. I would like to run the overall focus of this conversation today on three key themes, and that is where all our panelists will add a lot of inputs and expertise on. The first lens that we would be discussing today is the lens of a flourishing and a resilient city. What do we mean when we look at a city as a flourishing and resilient ecosystem, specifically from the context of Bengaluru? We all now know that we have come through about 1.5 years of the impact of COVID. We're still not done with it. So how does the next decade look for us from the vision of building a flourishing and a resilient city? Right? I think that will be the lens number one that we'll look at. The second lens would be on the lens of how would we bring about decentralized urban governance models in which there is integration of citizen participation. And we know that in Bengaluru, there's a decentralized model of governance which has been, which is in theory and in practice applicable at various decentralized levels known as wards. We know that the city of Bengaluru, approximately a population of about 13 million, is as of today divided close to about 200 wards, approximately each ward representing about 50,000 citizens over there. So that forms the most local unit of governance. So we will be looking at the lens of how this decentralized urban governance unit plays a strong and participative role, a citizen-led and citizen-participated role in enabling a flourishing and resilient city. And the third lens that we'll be speaking about today is the lens of climate change. I have been a resident of Bangalore for now close to 25 years. I'm no climate change expert, but definitely based on my living in Bangalore for the last 25 years, I think I can certainly agree and feel that climate change is real, right? Back in 25 years back, I think Bangalore felt extremely different, very different. And I'm sure many of my panelists who've been living in Bangalore for a long time would agree on that. And in the last 25 years or so, there has been a rapid pace of development of the city, combined with many infrastructural upgrades and developments and challenges. But at the same time, I think it's very pertinent to note that the climate in the city has changed and changed for good. And hence, that's the third lens that we'll be speaking about, is the lens of climate change. And how do we look at and take that lens when we look at the whole vision of building a resilient and flourishing city? So these are the three themes that we will intersect today. Hopefully the experiences and expertise of our experts will bring in various flavors and perspectives into these three intersecting themes. So this would be the background to the conversation today. I'm also happy to share with you that one of my colleagues, so I'm joined by 4 of my colleagues on the team today helping me out as well. I have Abhay, I have Vedita, I have Jai from the Flourishing Bengaluru Collective, and I also have Srini, who will be doing an interesting sketch noting and a visual journaling exercise for this panel discussion. So he'll be taking visual notes, and in the end of the session, he'll present a visual journal of this session. So that's something to look forward to as well. So without much ado, we'll get started with this panel discussion. I'll quickly introduce my panelists on the panel today. I'll start with Mr. Gaurav Gupta. Good morning, sir, and thank you for being with us. Mr. Gaurav Gupta is the Chief Commissioner of Brihat Bengaluru Mahanagara Palika, or BBMP, as we all know it. BBMP is the administrative body for the city of Bangalore. It is responsible for all civic amenities and some infrastructural assets of the greater Bengaluru metropolitan area, which is almost 13 million people residing in this area, as I said earlier. Mr. Gaurav Gupta is an officer of the Indian Administrative Services of the 1990 batch from the Karnataka cadre. In his distinguished career, he's held many positions within the government of Karnataka, including as Additional Chief Secretary, Commerce and Industries Department, Principal Secretary, Department of Information Technology, Biotechnology, Science and Technology, and Chairman of the Bangalore Water Supply Sewerage Board, Special Commissioner within the BBMP, Managing Director of KSRTC. So he has held many, many civic roles, and I think he knows a thing or two about Bangalore and its evolution. Good morning and welcome, sir. We will look forward to your inputs during this session. Then we have Mrs. Katyayani Chamaraj. She's the Executive Trustee of a non-profit organization called Civic. Civic has been one of the leading organizations which has been working on issues of urban governance with the rights-based approach in the state of Karnataka for a very, very long time. Mrs. Katyayani Chamaraj has been a freelance journalist for over 32 years now. She's been writing on a variety of developmental issues. She's also been working extensively with the government of Karnataka on issues like child labor and primary education. And she's been involved with several organizations and social movements, especially in the Right to Food and Work campaign. Katyayani ma'am, welcome, good morning, and look forward to your inputs as well. Then we have Dr. Champakar Raj Gopal. Dr. Champaka is a visiting faculty at the School of Public Policy and Governance at the Azim Premji University, where she's also the coordinator for the hub for law and policy. Dr. Champaka is an independent practitioner and researcher in the urban policy planning and governance space, and with over 20 years of experience working across national, state, and local governance in India and abroad. And her work cuts across multiple scales and sectors of urban and regional development. Very interestingly, she's also previously worked on several large-scale public sector projects, including the development plan for Greater Mumbai in 2034, as well as the revised master plan for Bengaluru 2015 with the Bangalore Development Authority. Welcome, Dr. Champaka. I'm looking forward to your specific inputs, technical inputs, academic inputs as well on this subject. Then we have Mr. Samir Sisodia. He's the CEO of Rainwater Foundation, which is a non-profit initiative committed towards the issue of climate change. They deploy resources to enable and scale solutions that help us address threats from climate change and also in aiding in the restoration of our natural ecosystem. Samir heads the Rainwater Foundation, developing projects within that and building funding and investment programs, amongst many other things. Samir has previously worked in the tech industry and has been an entrepreneur earlier. He's also the co-founder of the Farming Collective and Linger Leisure projects, a couple of very interesting projects, and he's an extremely committed bio enthusiast, and as his Twitter bio reads, he's a biker, farmer, traveler, dreamer, and a tree hugger. And his Medium page says that he speaks his mind. So I definitely look forward, Samir, to a lot of these flavors coming into your inputs today as well. Welcome you once again. So we have a stellar panel over here today, which we will dive in very soon with question answers. Before that, one picture. Jai, would you want to run is there a poll that we will run?
I think we can proceed straight away.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So we are on and set. So let me start by inviting the panelists to share their opening remarks on this subject, and I will put in an opening question to them, and we could go in sequence. I would request each of the panelists to take about 5 minutes to share their opening remarks on this question. So really, going to the entire team. So what are the top disruptive and transformative changes that you envisage to instill a really citizen-led decentralized city governance from Bangalore? So we've been talking about a lot of bringing citizen participation, citizen-led governance for quite a long time. We have Katyayani ma'am, who's been at the forefront of that. But going forward into the future, what is your vision for a citizen-led decentralized city governance for model for Bengaluru? And considering that climate change and its impact is real, I mean, how do you factor for such impact in bringing such disruptive changes? So essentially, what is our vision for Bengaluru from a decentralized citizen governance model point of view, and how does climate action or climate strategy play a role over there into visioning a resilient and vibrant Bengaluru? We'll start with you, sir. Gaurav Gupta, sir. A lot of experience, obviously, from the government's point of view perspective. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vikram. It's an opportunity to interact with the luminaries here. Morning, all. I'm sure all of you are from Bangalore. Katyayani, I know her for a very, very long time, and Champakar also, I recall having met her. And Vikram, obviously, we know you well, and you are the reason for me being here. Samir, I do not know whether I met you personally, but look forward to interacting with you in the future. If we talk about Bangalore, Bangalore is a city of, you mentioned 13 million. I was going through the statistics yesterday, and the decadal growth of Bangalore has been 5 million. Now, we were 8.5 million in 2011, and now the projected population is 13.5. So we are looking at a mega metropolis, which is larger in terms of population as compared to even cities of London, Paris, or New York. This obviously proves a lot of, shows a lot of, constraint in how the city is administered. And we firmly believe that the city has to be administered in a decentralized manner. And that's how, if you see the new municipal act, the decentralized model is based on various levels. While we talk about wards is the lowest level of administration. We are looking at 198 wards, which will go up to 243 wards in the new delimitation that is likely to happen shortly. But between the apex level and the wards, there are also another 2 levels. That is the zonal level, which we have 8 zones, and then we have the divisions, which we have 27 divisions as of now, and each one of them has different level of the administrative systems that are going along. Now, as far as the participative governance is concerned, we do interact with groups like you, Vikram. Say, for example, in the COVID period, we used your organization and tried to reach out through the resident welfare associations and the apartments federation and all that, to reach out to you to communicate better, to understand your requirements, and also to tailor make our products and services for you. So we likewise we work with several other organizations. We say, for example, work with the Wipro Foundation. We work with a number of NGOs and all. Now, in terms of the decentralized participative model, ward committees, etc., have been envisaged in the Act. I'm sure Katyayani will dwell a little more on this. But ward committees are supposed to be chaired by the ward cooperators. Right now, we are waiting for the new body to come in, and that will happen. But till such time, we have a system which is right now in the process of getting evolved, in which we have the officers who are chairing it. But we look beyond even this also. Say, for example, if you are looking at the solid waste management, which is a critical part in managing the city, because of the large degree of involvement that is required. So we have a system in which we are working with a number of NGOs, number of partners for identifying resource persons at the apex level, then the zonal coordinators, all from the community, and then down to the ward level and block level. Blocks are below the ward level. So each of the wards, which is 50,000 population, will be sorry. So 50,000 population will be governed by one single block, which has say around 750 population or so. So they will be close to 30 to 40 blocks, which will be there, and each of the blocks below that, they will be lane volunteers, etc. That are working on. So these are the kind of systems that we need to work on, and we need citizen participation. Citizen participation. Without citizen participation, we cannot get things on the ground, and that's what we are working at. And as far as I'll close very shortly. I know that's the opening remarks, and I'm sure that we'll come back later. But as far as the climate change is concerned, because you have woven too many threads into the today's discussion. So as far as the climate change is concerned, we all are working on that. We are working with the C40 initiative at the global level, which is looking at 40 cities, etc., which go into the issue of managing the climate change. And we are working out a plan as to how we can, be far more responsive to the requirements, and how we can reduce the carbon imprint in the city. It could be because of certain measures, like for example, it could be vehicular emissions, or it could be use of energy, or several others. But I'll dwell on it a little later. So for now, very happy to learn from you, and look forward to meaningful discussions from the other co-participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. I think those were very interesting opening notes. We'll come to dwell on certain other points, I think, from your opening remarks a little later as well. Katyayani ma'am, I mean, I'll go to you next. Your vision and your expectations for a flourishing and a resilient Bengaluru of the next couple of decades, if I were to put it that way, right? What are you envisaging? And from your own specific work on championing urban local governance, what do you see some of those elements coming in? What are some of the challenges that you anticipate? Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. Very nice to interact with you after many, many years. And thank you, Vikram and Climate Change Initiative for giving me this opportunity. And yes, Civic has a long standing history of working on urban governance, especially on decentralized governance. And our institution coincides with the passage of the 74th Amendment. So that's been our focus. And our challenge has been to bring the political will and the bureaucratic will to make the 74th Amendment a reality, because without our constant pushing and putting pressure, the ward committees, which are the decentralized bodies foreseen in the 74th Amendment for citizen participation, would never actually come into being unless the people put pressure. Though it is there in the law since 1992, there has been a lack of political will and bureaucratic will. And the law that was framed is also very weak in that it didn't really enable citizens to plan for their area, to monitor what is going on, and to do social auditing of the works, which is the only way we could have really made it accountable and transparent. And we know that the law was modified in 2011 to make it more participatory by bringing in the idea of area sabhas, which are at the booth level, at every polling booth level. And it is sad to note, sir, that since 2011, the area sabhas have not been notified in Bangalore, let alone in the other municipal corporations. And so every voter has been denied the opportunity to participate in the planning for his area. And and also that is the building block for democracy. So our urban citizens have been denied the role of making democracy really work as a system of governance of the people, by the people, and for the people. And also, Mr. Gaurav Gupta touched upon the latest act especially for BBMP, and we noticed that in that levels of committees have been introduced, like an assembly level committee has been introduced with an MLA as the heading chairperson, which is totally against the spirit of the 74th Amendment, sir. And the worst thing that we see in the new act for BBMP is that though the ward committee has been called, even the area sabha has been called a municipal authority, finally in the end they say they are only advisory bodies. So the entire participatory mechanism has been turned into just a recommendatory body, so that ultimately the councillors continue to do what they want to do and not what the citizens want them to do, which is the principle of representative government, which means the representatives have to do what the citizens want or whom they represent. So that whole idea has been washed out in this new act, though it was supposed to make Bangalore more participatory and all that. So and the other aspect is that to address the issue of climate change, we need a database. What is the level of sustainability in that ward? What is the level of sewage treatment? What is the level of garbage management at the local level? Or even the matter of air pollution caused by, lack of last mile connectivity, maybe for the public transport system and things like that. So we need a database which will tell us what is the sustainability index of that ward, so that it becomes a basis for planning for the ward and for addressing the climate change issues. And very importantly, the way the planning is going on, I'm sure Champaka will add more to that. There is total violation of the building bylaws, and also a lot of encroachment on the lake beds and everywhere, which the ward committee should actually, identify and take action. And so that has not been allowed for the last 29 years. And blatant violations are going on, and we end up just regularizing it as we go along. And and the other aspect is that the rules promise to have a ward disaster management cell, which could deal with the disasters or climate change effects in the ward. And we had to go to the court to even get those initiated. So without the court interfering, most of the things are not happening. So I'll touch upon the aspects of the ward disaster management cell, which really talks about a local team building and local disaster management plan being developed by the ward disaster management cell, and so on. I'll go into that later because I think my time is up. So these are my initial remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Katyayani. I think interesting perspectives following Mr. Gupta's opening remarks. And that leads me to Champaka. I mean, Champaka, we spoke about it. One of the fundamental things to look at is the disparity or the difference in expectations. So you're between policy, strategy, execution, and finally it hitting the mainstream sort of citizen expectation. There are various levels that we straddle, and we are already able to see that in the perspectives which has come through. So from your perspective, and you've spent a lot of time, I think, studying and looking at urban systems from an urban planner's perspective, an academician's perspective. So your thoughts, opening remarks, Champaka, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be on this panel and on this discussion with this esteemed panel is really a privilege. Since this forum is about innovating for cities, I thought it's important for me to share my reflections on innovations theory as such, because I engage with this body of work. We have scholars very much located within Bangalore, Dr. Smita Srinivas, Dr. Balaji Padsarthi, they all engage very deeply with innovations theory. And I've relied on this both for my practice work as well as research. And my co-panelists have highlighted legal and administrative anomalies pertaining to decentralization and challenges therein. And I'll focus on economic relationships and try and discuss and situate decentralization and innovations within the context of uncertainties and risks, because climate change speaks to uncertainties and risks. So when decentralization is viewed from an innovations perspective, and we no longer view spaces of decision-making through relatively more predictable thresholds of national, state, and city governments or ward committees, right? Because these are relatively more clearly defined spaces of governance within constitutional amendments. But in reality, we have two strong forces that play. There's institutional variety and there's scales at which these institutions interact. And so essentially, today in this liberalized era, it's a variety of institutions that are involved in decision-making, and variety here implies that these institutions are often misaligned in their values and goals. When I say misaligned, for example, we have, of course, public organizations working with private sector agencies. Public agencies are welfare-driven, and private firms are, we all know, they are driven by profit-making motivation. So there's clear misalignment in the values and goals of these two institutions that are coming together to work in public interest for the society, for instance. There's a great degree of heterogeneity even within these institutions, right? Public agencies, there are a host of them with their own legitimate roles and responsibilities. Similarly, within the society, there's a great degree of heterogeneity, both in terms of social, economic levels of disparities that exist. So there's a great level of tension, but also cooperation, competition, as well as symbiotic relationships. So this whole set of relationships and economic and social relationships that exist within the space of governance is very complex in our cities. An appropriate example here is the Statutory Revised Master Plan for Bangalore, which is a legal instrument that envisions the city's futures. And this plan, which I've been involved in the past as well, was recently revoked by the state government as the plan did not adequately integrate land use and transport networks. The tensions here were between two specific types of agencies, as I read it. It's agencies, government organizations, and allied markets and other institutions as well, given this context of institutional varieties. One dealing with land and the other dealing with mobility. So the Bangalore Development Authority, or the BDA, is the planning authority. The BDA is also dichotomously entrusted with the responsibility of developing residential layouts, that is legitimately entrusted with this responsibility. And developing residential layouts here means subdividing agricultural land or land in the peri-urban areas and redistributing this land at subsidized rates to the public. Now, intentionally or otherwise, by pursuing its own legitimate role, the BDA tends to propagate urban sprawl. Now, public agencies such as the Bangalore Metro Rail Corporation, in charge of mass transit, are aggressively advocating compact cities, which is quite the opposite of what would happen if there's greater appropriation of agricultural land in the peri-urban areas, right? So there's tension between these two visions for the city. There's sprawl on the one hand, and then there's compaction on the other hand. There's developing compact cities on the other hand. And these are very much situated within the motivations of two government organizations and their own legitimacy itself. And so after about 7 years of its making, this plan is back on the drawing board because sustainability is a strong agenda that the state government as well as local governments are driving very aggressively, in fact. So there are other similar tensions we see in Mumbai, for instance, and I've been involved in the development plan there for about 4.5 years. And in Mumbai, we saw perverse political economies and markets which tend to capture regulatory spaces that are bureaucratically led as well. So there's tensions between civil society organizations, of course, and the bureaucracy, but the bureaucracy and the political agents as well. So there's a whole range of complex relationships that exist here. And this variety of institutions then work do not work necessarily at these predictable scales of national, state, and local governments anymore. These are decisions which occur at multiple scales at all points in time. So if it's ward committees, for instance, they are interacting with international organizations as well as local, very local organizations at the same time. So I think this variety and scale really complexifies the way we would look at decentralization itself. I think we need to look at decentralization within the scale and institutional variety context. And what is the outcome of this complexity? It's basically, we're no longer in that simple circumstance of participation. I think we need to really go beyond it if we want to address these uncertainties and risks. We need to really sit across each other and say, we are here with misaligned goals and targets. Now let's see if my risks are your profits and your profits are my risks. And now let's see where we need to build compromises and commit to these compromises. Commit to these compromises in terms of, say, profit after tax for companies or other kinds of compromises that civil society members themselves would need to make. There's NIMBYist attitudes, which we see in amongst our residents as well, right? So all of us need to make compromises in order to make sure that we deal with uncertainties and risks. I think I'll stop over there.
Well, thanks. I think, Champakar, those are interesting perspectives on sort of institutional variety and complexity and tension. That's the word that you use, right? And how do we scale this in the context of this variety, tension, and conflict, right? That is there. We'll probably explore some of the answers or at least inputs towards that in the rest of this session. Thanks so much. I'll come to Sameer now. Sameer, I sort of see my own journey in Bangalore as much as being reflective of what your journey has been. Pretty much someone who's been part of the growth of the city through being a participant of the tech industry. We've made our own jumps to different spaces and corners where we are finding a little bit more of meaning and purpose. And here you are with the Rainmatter Foundation after probably about 2 decades of life, being part of the growth of what Bangalore is. So today, as part of and Rainmatter Foundation in that sense is a new product of the new Bangalore, right? Looking at climate change strategically. So what are your views? How are you looking at the next 10 to 20 years, both from the lens of that foundation, which will be making strategic sort of interventions and investments towards countering climate change, but more also from the point of being a Bangalorean who's been here for 20 years, right? What are your views for the next 20 years?
Yeah, so thanks, Vikram. Delighted to be here and hoping to tap into the experience and wisdom of all the panelists because we are fairly new to the game. We just started on this journey recently when Zerodha announced Rainmatter Foundation last November. So, in fact, we come in slightly differently on this. So, we have the climate lens first, and then the urban and the decentralization lens that came in as we actually started understanding this. To be honest, our first instinct was that we will leave the city problem alone, because part of we were looking at a whole systems approach because climate is not a small geography problem. It's a problem that exists at scale with lots of linkages and correlations. So we actually took the view that today you have a few economic engines which are this the handful of cities across the country that represent most of our economy, that represent a lot of the consumption, that represent a lot of the concentration of resources, as it were, and so on and so forth across the country. So our early view was that this needs to spread out. India is a country of 6.5 lakh villages, and it's absurd to have just 6 economic engines that divide the country, right? But then the fact that these are the economic engines, that these have a very high level of consumption, they actually, in some sense, suck in resources, people, skills from a very, very large hinterland around them. Bangalore is, half of Karnataka in many ways. Whether you take the number of vehicles running here, the number of people living here, it's a staggering percentage of all of the state. Right. If you look at where our water comes from, where our electricity comes from, the impact Bangalore has on a very large area outside the city, across the state, is staggering. We also are net exporters of wastewater, polluted air, polluted soil, and interestingly, we are also net exporters of aspirations. Right. So when we framed the problem in this context, it became very, very clear that the city is also a great opportunity to start a change. Right, from the negatives of all the behaviors that have led to climate change today upwards. So Bangalore is also a great city to start with, because this is a city where a lot of people are. We heard arguments around citizen participation. In the formal sense, there are lots of gaps there, undoubtedly true. But in the informal sense, Bangalore also has a whole bunch of individuals, organizations, etc., who are continuously trying to pitch in, managing to pitch in, and actually making a change in many, many different ways. So I believe that if any city can actually turn the curve, it's Bangalore. So the gap that's missing today is that we see is we do have a very consumer and a rights approach to how we live in the city, and that's more than just participation in decision making. Even our sense of responsibility towards let's say other wards in the city, or the Mufasal towns, or the farms downstream, we got to acquire a sense of responsibility towards our larger geographical context in which we exist. We got to start looking at it as a rights and responsibility based approach, and I think that's where both engagement and the climate problem intersect very, very massively. I'm looking to hear on more details around ideas. I mean, I know that everybody on the panel has been doing fantastic work on this. I'm looking to get an education on that today.
Well, thanks, Amit. Very interesting perspectives, and I want to come back to you, later during the segment on understanding some of those concepts a little in detail. And in terms of how are you as a foundation approaching some of these rights plus responsibility based sort of scale up of solutions, right? And looking at not just the city, but the ecosystem around the city. You use the terminology that we are net exporters of a lot of things which are which are causing a negative impact on the ecosystems around us. So we'll come back to that. But thank you to all the panelists for the opening round of comments, and I'll now quickly sort of jump into some specific points that you mentioned so that we can get a little detail into that. If I can come to you, Gaurav Gupta sir, for a quick set of comments, and I want to quickly allude to a couple of pieces which both Katyayani and Champaka made, right? One is Katyayani spoke about the whole legal and statutory drag, right? It takes a lot of time for policies to come through. I mean, there are policies which are already been enshrined, which sort of over a period of time possibly get diluted, changed from its fundamental ethos. And Champaka spoke about various institutions within the government and around it, the variety, the tension, and sort of disparate expectations between them as well. So, sir, if I were to quickly draw upon your experience from the government, we know that I think these disparities will exist. We know that these drags will exist. So, looking forward, and you've been in the system for such a long time. If you were to take a slightly outsider perspective and sit outside the system, and you, of course, we know that there is this drag, there are these disparities, etc. And if you were to look at the next 10, 20 years and say that what are some of the strategies that we will, or at least bring in to, I know that I think these drags and these disparities will not be removed overnight, but what is the approach to handle these drags and disparities? And bring in an approach which then the common citizen is able to appreciate and understand that, it might take a long time, but there's a plan towards that. Sorry, we're not able to hear.
Yeah. So, you see, we have had different speakers who have talked about various issues. Katyani talked about how the law has failed the constitution and how they have to struggle through the courts in order to get the decentralized model, and that still is not a goal reached as yet. I hope I'm summarizing it well, Katyani. Now, Champaka talked about how the master plan of the city has been bereft of transport planning and how it has been put on the shelf and it is being taken up again. And I hope I'm summarizing it okay. Sami talked about larger issues which are very relevant about water, about wastewater, and such other issues on which we need to be much more sustainable. And we need to understand how to weave in the climate change and sustainability together with the growth of the city. Now, it's just like describing an elephant, right? So each one of us see different aspects of it, and they are all relevant. But let me only say that there is no city in the whole world which is growing at the decadal growth of 5 million, adding 5 million people in 1 decade. So we are looking at uh, 13 million residents, and each one of them has aspirations. And those aspirations basically are articulated to various means. And I'm sure each one of the participants represents different sections of the people whose aspirations they are articulating. And what is necessary is to hear each one of them, provide them a place in the interactive process, and then go ahead. As far as all these things are concerned, I would only say this, that large part of this population in Bangalore is a population that has never been born here. Some of them have moved in 10, 20 years back. Some of them have moved in maybe very recently. I have been working in the city for last 30 years. Vikram, you mentioned about 25 years for yourself. Samir mentioned about, I think, 20 years. Champaka I didn't mention, so I don't know. But Katyani, I'm sure, is born and brought up here. So she is the oldest of the participants. But what I'm saying is, if a person comes in, say, for example, from abroad, or say comes from Calcutta or from other place, do they have structures to participate in the governance of the city? Do they have do they know how the city functions? Or do they know the water comes from 100 kilometers away over a height of 1,000 feet? And do they know how the lakes sustain themselves? Do they know how the water flows, which side is the drainage, and which road slopes which way and all that? Why I'm saying is that I recall an example of Singapore in which I was driving down to a desalination plant, and my driver on the way, having known the address, says that, look here, why are you going to that? If I remember the name, it was Dras. It was a small town on the western side of the island. And he says that, why are you going there? I said, such and such. And he says, our country is short of water. We have to import water from Singapore, Johor in Malaysia, and we have to take up water recycling. And this is how our water recycling plants are. This is how we are rainwater harvesting, or this is how we are doing the desalination. And desalination is one of the most expensive ways of generating water. Now, this is a taxi driver, and it's a chance journey that I'm talking about. Now, how many of people in the city know about that? I'm talking about the migrants who come in. So if we are talking about citizen governance, in that case, we also need to talk about public communication. We need to have different groups, and we cannot have a city in which, there's one particular group which has an apex role of communicating, etc. And that is not possible. So we need to have a network. We need to have a federation of people working together, understanding each other, understanding the constraints of each other, and working on that. Now, many people say that, look here, BBMP has not done it and all that. And I would say that how many of you understand the administrative constraints of the BBMP? It's a big organization. It has never been designed for the city that we are in. But very often people from different walks of life who have been associated with the Mahanagarpalika, that is the municipal corporation, have realized, and we have been working with the people. Nandan Nilekani, for example, a long time back, 20 years back, was associated with the city in this. There was something called Bangalore Agenda Task Force. And there was also this issue of sharing the municipal finances, revamping the municipal taxation system, and such others. And they have realized, Ramesh Namanathan would have been there, Swati has worked on different things. There are very many others, Naresh Narasimhan, architects, they are working with us. Number of others are there. And then Kiran Mazumdar Shaw has been working and all. So what I'm saying is that each one of these leaders understand that it's a constraint because one is it is a very big city. Each one of the wards, which is 50,000 population, is a city by itself, and wards itself is not a lowest tier of administrative governance. So what we need to understand is to appreciate that not all is well, but not all is broken also. So we need to understand that we are on the path by which we have to walk step by step, go forward, take people along, and work on that. And we are really delighted, and that's the reason why I chose to be in the panel today, that we need to understand and we need to communicate, we need to talk. And very often, if we don't understand the city, in that case, it becomes, we draw conclusions that appear to be cacophonic or in dissonance with each other, and etc. And let me say this. Uh, as far as the city is concerned, city is a very important part of the state, and that's what Samir mentioned about. City is almost 1/4 of the population of the city, of the state of Karnataka. It is almost 70% of the tax revenue base of the state. And if you are talking about the ownership of cars or any other purchasing power is concerned, etc., it is the prime mover, and not only for the state of Karnataka, but for the entire South India. People who have aspirations from the states of Andhra Pradesh, they come here. People having aspirations from Kerala, they come here, live here, work here, and from Tamil Nadu as well. So what I'm saying is, it's a city we used to call Mumbai the city of dreams, right? So this is also a city of aspirations, as Samir, I think, summarized it. So each one of us have to see and understand how we can contribute and how we can work out a system. And whether, even if we have a formal system of ward governance, let me say this. I have attended several of the ward committee meetings, and I realized that ward is so big, and sometimes it's only the well-heeled among us who talk about it. And there are different other sections. In every ward, you have less privileged people who do not know. They are basically going for basic needs, and they don't have time to participate in the thing. So when we have the elected corporators, as they would be shortly, in that case, they will give voice to their aspirations, particularly to the underprivileged, and they will also come and participate. Yes, they are, we know their shortcomings, but we also know their strong points as well. Unless we hear from them, we will perhaps not be able to hear from the disadvantaged communities. So let us work at that, and we all want this city to do it. The city is known not only in India but also abroad. Once I was talking in the Bay Area to one of the multinational firms, and said that, look here, why you should invest more in India and in Karnataka and in Bangalore. And They said, look here, don't talk to me about all of this. Just see that the road between Sarjapur Road and Marthali is restored, and that is set right. Okay, and the traffic congestion eases. So this is the kind of knowledge people have of the city. I have known people from Israel, from France, who have lived here for 3-4 years, and after some time they say, we don't want to go somewhere. We are so happy living here, and each one of them finds their own space. There are walking communities, there are cycling communities, there are heritage communities, and each one of them finds their own place within the city, just like any other big city should be. So let me, I'm just trying to put the things in perspective and saying that while we have constraints, but we also have a lot of, this is a city of aspirations. Anybody, I recall another incident, and I'll close. I was talking to, my son took me to a coffee shop, and that coffee shop in Koramangala was called Third Wave Coffee Roasters. And this shop came up next to Starbucks, Barista, Coffee Day, etc. And this was doing really well. And I was talking to the owner, look here, give me this kind of coffee. And he says, no, the coffee will be, this is a cold press, and this is a hot pour, and this is this kind of coffee, and all that. And I said, look here, my coffee is not hot enough. And he said, no, the coffee will get burnt. It has to be like this. And why I'm citing this example is, this person came to Bangalore only 2 years back or 3 years back, earlier to that, whenever I had the interaction. And he is from Jamshedpur, and he was a coffee connoisseur. And he went around for single origin coffees and how to serve the best coffee. And then he realized that, look here, if they have to start a business, they have to start it in Bangalore. And because that is the place where there's a market. And then he decided on the location and said it must be Koramangala. And in Koramangala, then he decided on the lane, and then decided on how it can be done. So what I'm saying is, there are a lot of people who have aspirations, who come here, who succeed. What we are seeing in the terms of startups, what we are seeing in terms of new age industries, etc. in Bangalore, is basically symptomatic of that. It basically shows the kind of things that we are working at. So what I'm saying is, there's a lot of hope in the city. There's a lot of dream in the city. We need to just make it work better. We must realize that systems are not as good as they must be. We have to realize that we are adding 5 million to the city in the last decade, which is phenomenal growth. Even 3 million addition in any city is phenomenal. Singapore, for example, limits it at 5.5 million, will go up to 5.7 million in the next decade. That is the kind of population growth that they project. But here we have city which is bursting at its seams. I was talking yesterday about the water supply and sewage networks. 2,500 kilometers of water lines and sewage lines are being laid on the city periphery. And that is a phenomenal job. Again, a professor who was teaching us water and wastewater issues in Singapore mentioned, he was a US person from South Carolina. And he mentioned that, look here, in my house in South Carolina, I don't have a sewage line. And we are working on decentralized model, which is, I'm forgetting the right word, but it's basically looking at septic tanks and working on that, because he says our city cannot afford sewage lines. Now, if a professor teaching wastewater in his own town is not having sewage network, the sewage network is expensive. It is being taken up at great cost, and it takes a lot of time because you are looking at built-up area. So I'm only trying to put forth the complexity of the city, and I'm saying that we all should work together. I look forward to interacting with you at various forums. And like any other big city, like any other mega city, this is our city. This is our city, and we need to work with it. We need to. I know great many of you who are working, contributing to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think many interesting inputs and perspectives, but I think you also end with a note of potential anticipation and expectation to share inputs. And yeah, I know at least in my personal interaction with you, there has been a great degree of openness to listen. So that's something which I take back. I hope the Third Wave Coffee Roasters owner does not come back to you soon and asks you to repair the 80 feet Koramangala road, which might be his next immediate expectation coming to you from
No, I know that, and I'm sure that he has already started diversifying into various places. I saw
I'm sure
in
he'll place
Ruby
his
City some
expectations
time
to you
back.
very soon. He'll have his list of asks to you. So thank you
I'm
very
sure
much.
he's doing well. Let me
Yeah,
say
well,
this.
I mean, it's Third Wave Coffee Roasters is one of the bustling entrepreneurial hubs. Most of the ideas are getting discussed over there, I believe. So I know you have to leave as well, sir. So I mean, if you're around, but thank you so much
No,
for your time.
You see, we have a very enviable kind of job. We need to answer, we need to be there everywhere, and yet people will feel that, look here, we are not participative enough. Today we have legislative committee meetings, which are representatives of the people again in their groups. They talk about it. So 3 such meetings are scheduled today, and beside that there are several other engagements. And I would love to be with you and maybe share a coffee sometime. And
Sure.
look forward to working with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. No, absolutely, sir. Look forward to some of the inputs from this session also being sort of tabled and the synthesis of it. We will share that with you as well. But thank you so much. I'll jump over to Champaka. I think Champaka, there's a interesting perspective that I want to hook on to. I mean, Mr. Gupta talked a lot about people coming in from other cities, other countries, etc., and also their sense of aspiration and expectations. But taking a step back, and I know you have worked with multiple cities, both globally and in India. So what are some of the, I think Mr. Gupta spoke about the challenges. I think he alluded to the institutional variety and multiplicities of in terms of how this works. He referred to it as an elephant being looked at it from different directions, but I think he stopped short of saying what should we do about it, right? So if you could draw in upon your experience and expertise from the other cities that you've worked with, what are some of the learnings that we have for Bangalore itself?
Sure. I think I wish he was here for this discussion, for the rest of this discussion as well, because one important point that comes from Mr. Gaurav Gupta's own vision for the city is about allowing all kinds of institution spaces for participation, right? And we've got very deep voices coming from the civil society space. Ms. Katyayani Chamraj has been spearheading this with a whole range of others in the city. But I would like to really emphasize the need for giving a similar level of space for private sector, for markets to actually transparently engage with citizens as well as government spaces in placing their demands. There is no formal space that private sector agencies or markets actually have in the decision-making space. It's not transparent. One needs to see their demands in a transparent way so that allocation of finances, etc., that take place is also transparently visible. So that in a ward where third wave coffee roasters are located, for instance, is the priority to improve road surfaces adjoining third wave, or are there other localities, for instance, around that area that need greater attention? And where should the city government prioritize allocation of finances for improvement of services? That's one part. I'd quickly like to take us also to another scale of discussions, which is and urbanization itself, which is taking place not so much from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the urban development space, urban development department and spaces pertaining to municipalized governance, but it's more about industrial development and large-scale trunk infrastructure projects which are coming up. Say, for example, Bangalore-Mumbai Economic Corridor regions. The National Industrial Development Corporation has 5 mega regions that are coming up in the city, right? And these are huge strategic projects, and strategic projects are actually seen as ways for propelling economic growth and development as a whole. And what I'd really like to speak about here is how there's this economic restructuring is accompanied by mission. It's sort of synonymous with the mission economy. All of these projects are governed by all of these infrastructure projects are governed by sort of mission-led institutional arrangements, such as special purpose vehicles. There are joint venture partnerships. And I'm speaking about this because, again, if you're talking about decentralization, then we really need to get into micro level, granular understanding of how these organizations, special purpose vehicles, are actually governed within their own spaces. Now, project implementation of all of these large-scale engineering projects is basically structured on joint venture partnerships, which then defines public-private partnership arrangements. For example, modernization of railway stations or airports, all of these transport infrastructure projects or other water sector, sanitation sector projects, these are all kind of, there's this public-private partnerships and special purpose vehicles have become all pervasive in our governance arrangements. And to attract private investors, these organizations are envisaged as sort of gated, safe havens for private investors to invest in, so that they will not face external threats from and quote unquote political interference as such. So they're gated from social mobilizations, for example. And I don't negate the fact that institutional arrangements that support public and private partnerships are important in terms of fostering organizational innovations. But what is really important is that these organizations are basically governed by contractual governance mechanisms. They are not municipal open-ended systems. They're actually closed systems. And these long-term contracts, most of these contracts are long-term contracts, and they're basically incomplete contracts. And when I say incomplete, of course, legal scholars would say all contracts are incomplete. But we're looking at relationships that exist in the interstices of these incomplete contracts. And basically the problem here is that incomplete contracts give rise to the problem of residual control rights. And in these contractual incompleteness, we have parties that are contracting, which these are moments where the contractual agreement ceases to exist. And in conditions where contractual governance contracts don't exist, then neither party is able to foresee the behavior of the other party. So if public and private sector agencies are involved in a particular gated SPV governing large infrastructure projects, then in contractual incompleteness, the public sector agency does not have information about how the private sector agency is going to behave, and vice versa. And what these give rise to is behavior from both parties that are in self-interest as opposed to public interest. And these are gated. There's no democratic, although these organizations are envisaged through constitutional provisions, but at the operational level, at the micro level, decentralized level of governance, they actually don't function through democratically led values. And it is these governance mechanisms that basically then lead to a whole range of other risks and uncertainties, such as cost escalations on projects, project delays, which then lead to risks that are borne eventually by the state, by the public, but also by the private sector. So everybody.
Cut you short, but just if I were to build on that point, can you also quote examples? So you're talking about large scale sort of institutional arrangements, basically, right? But can you quote examples from other experiences, other cities as well, very quickly, if that's possible, for also to get a context saying that, how does this operate and what is the precedence and operation from other examples as well, other cities as well? Are there any examples that you can also sort of share?
There are examples in Bangalore itself. If you're looking at the IRSDC, which is the railways, the organization entrusted with the responsibility for modernization of railways. There's the Bangalore International Airport, Mumbai International Airport, Navi Mumbai International Airport. These are all large infrastructure projects which are strategically envisaged to propel growth in our city regions. These are, we're in the era of making of city regions. It's not just the city. And micro level governance of these organizations is very important for us to unpack. They're not led by democratically led values, and they need to be opened up so that the risks which are finally borne by many of us, taxpayers, for instance, these are opaque forms of governance, and it's critical for these contractual governance mechanisms to be made open and easy to understand also for everyone. I'm speaking about large-scale infrastructure projects largely, which are, and this mission economy, as the economist Mazzucato has argued, it's all pervasive. Since these are gated, it's very attractive for both governments as well as private sector agencies to enter in partnerships. But they're ridden with risks, which are finally borne by everybody, the state, the society, and the private sector.
Interesting. And I'll quickly segue to Samir. Champakar is bringing in perspectives which is talking about large scale design, right? As far as city's growth and its planning is concerned, basically, right? And of course, Mr. Gupta before that spoke about how the government is open to look at it. Of course, there are sort of different dissonance aspects of it, etc. But we need to be able to bring in multiple perspectives. Now, from your perspectives and the foundation's perspective, and I know that I think you're looking at climate change and sort of ecological systems as a scope, and you spoke about also how for you the city is not just the city, right? We bear a responsibility to the ecosystem around us as well. How do you look at solutions? And I'm sure you get a lot of proposals and inputs to fund, to support, to grow, to scale, right? What are the kinds of innovations that you're looking at coming through, and what are some of the interesting ones which are pertaining to, better design of the city and the solutions that intersect with the city?
Thanks. I think both Champaka and Mr. Gupta actually touched upon things that we are interested in. We're taking a slightly whole systems approach to this. At one level, before we jump into methods and solutions, I think various people spoke about a vision for the city. But does Bangalore have a vision for itself? Do the 1.3 crore people here, right? What do we think of? We think of ourselves as a tech city, and a pub city, and a used to be city of lakes and gardens, and so on and so forth. But what is our consciousness in the sense of the ecology, in sense of the responsibility we own, in sense of who we are, where our water comes from? Like Mr. Gupta was saying, do we understand where Bangalore is? And it's not just the migrants, and a lot of people who have been here for generations do not know that Bangalore has over half a dozen rivers that originate from the city. Bangalore actually births rivers, and yet we get our water from over 100 kilometers away. Right? Bangalore has beautiful lake system. The three major and the two minor valleys actually drain it very amazingly. Like it's a lot of this is not understood. Like the third wave Roosters example that he gave, where does it sit? What valley does it belong to? That road is famous for turning into a lake because it was. Right? And as we plan our urban spaces, as we plan the city, can we include this knowledge? Like I've often argued that being indigenous is actually about being rooted to the geography, to the floral history, to the natural history of the place, to understand it, right? And as we build a city and design a city, can we include that knowledge? Can we build with it rather than against it? Can we, instead of just imposing structures and concrete and design on top of natural landscapes, on top of historical landscapes, can we build with it so that we account for the ecology, so that we account for the native wisdom that resides there, that the understanding that resides there? So one huge push that we are trying to make, again, with whoever is willing to partner and is interested in this, both formally and informally, it will have to happen in the space of the larger consciousness, and it will have to happen in the space of formal structures and policies and all the documentation that's needed. Is how do you actually include ecological considerations, geographical considerations, this knowledge of the land, ground up in your planning, in your design, in your choice of materials, right? How do you account, like the city, actually not just Bangalore, most cities have accounted for the economic side of things, to a certain extent, the human services side of things, but at a huge cost to the ecology. That has just not figured in there's no vocabulary for it in our formal planning. There's the consciousness around it is largely missing, right? So the methods will emerge. There will be debates around the market methods, state methods, civic groups. For instance, how lakes have been revived in Bangalore in pockets is a great example of people pitching in and actually defining it well. Lake design has actually improved through a few iterations. There's still many gaps, but it has improved. The methods will actually emerge and evolve. But what is our vision for the city? So the communication bit is equally important. As you start to fix the vocabulary and the methods and the materials in policy and design, you need to work on communication. You need to, all of us need to evolve a vision for who we are as Bangalore and what we mean to our neighbors. Fixing my lake by passing the sewage from here to the next lake downstream is not a great solution. It works for now, because this is what we can do best now. But this is not, you're not being a great neighbor to the next ward, right? So we need to start asking and understanding a lot of these questions. Asking for more and more water from 100 kilometers away is not a great place to be as a city. Can we take responsibility for our own water? So what is our collective vision for the city has to emerge? Our understanding of the landscape, our understanding of the resources we have, the amount of rainfall we have, the fact that we have 5 valleys, etc. That's got to be built into design. We got to account for, when we build roads, can we account for? I came across a very amazing fact. Bangalore has over 100 spots where birders have spotted 100 species of birds. That's astounding for a city of this size, right? So can we build on that? Can we create, if not, we can't create wildlife corridors in the city, but we can definitely do it for birds and small animals. Right? So
I'm going to quickly,
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point, Samir. I just want to get a additional inference on that. You mentioned about sort of a lot of indigenous and local know-how, which sort of and pieces of wisdom and specifics which exist to the city. Are you finding initiatives and projects which are sort of integrating them and bringing it together? Because to also put together that vision, I think we need to be able to look at that all these things in its entirety, right? So are you coming across any projects, interventions, which is sort of, even for that matter, documenting some of these things about what is unique to Bangalore? Are you coming across anything like that?
So there are, there are a lot of people doing this on the birding front, on biodiversity, and so on and so forth. I am aware that now urban forests are being planned by the state itself. It's a slow process, but it's happening as biodiversity parks and so on and so forth. So there are many pockets of this happening. We know that the well digger community around Bangalore is very active and involved in doing chasing the million wells that we want to do for Bangalore. There one missing piece I feel is like this is one of the few rare cities in the world with a which actually includes a very large national park at its periphery, right? Like the number of tigers, bears, and elephants we have all around the city is staggering, right? So our sense of being in a place which is still wild around, right, has to emerge more strongly. There are many pockets of it. So I think this still needs to add up, but there's a lot of hope. I think Bangalore represents more hope than most cities in the world.
Fantastic. And I hope, Samir, you and your team are able to sort of champion some of these initiatives as well in the days ahead. And I think looking forward to that. I'll give the last word to Katyayani ma'am, who's been listening in. And before that, I just wanted to quickly let the audience, either through the Zoom format or the live cast format, if you have any questions, please do post it in your respective comment sections. If we have time, we'll probably be able to pick a couple of them to be addressed through the panelists. If not, we will note all those questions and of course add it to the summary of this discussion itself, which has been very rich. Katyayani ma'am, last word to you. You've now heard, I think, Mr. Gupta talking about the challenges, but talking about how being open to learning and sort of co-creating as we go along. Champakar spoke a lot about, I mean, how from a multi-cities perspective point of view, as well as large infrastructure projects, and how to build in that framework of transparency and control. And Samir spoke about various kinds of initiatives which are very specific to Bangalore, which needs to be recognized and integrated into the planning of the city itself, including lots of aspects around how we as a city can become responsible for a lot of our actions. But you work day in and day out with citizens on the ground. So what does this mean to the people and for their sense of participation and being a part of Bangalore and being part of determining the vision and the legacy of Bangalore? What does that mean from a common citizen's perspective? And I'll hope that will be an ending note that we leave with, right? This conversation. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, I would first like to touch upon what Mr. Gaurav Gupta spoke, that he seemed to think that allowing Bangalore to grow and grow and grow is the solution, or it is something to be very proud of. Actually, it is making the city totally ungovernable. They need to realize that there is a carrying capacity for the city, and you cannot go on, expecting more and more investment to come only into Bangalore. And that seems to be the thinking of most of the bureaucrats who I have come across. And there are studies now which show that unless you decentralize even your investment to the other tier 2 and tier 3 cities, Bangalore is going to become ungovernable. It will become less inclusive and less sustainable. So I think the whole premise needs to be questioned, that this is a glorious thing that's happening to Bangalore. So, and also he spoke about certain people who have been influencing policy. Now that has been happening over decades in Bangalore, where non-institutional or non-formalized systems have been influencing policy to favor themselves. And he also spoke about, and which has made Bangalore what it is today. It's totally unsustainable growth, where your land, your water, your air, everything is polluted, and that is not the way to be going. And he also said that the councillors are there to speak up for those who are marginalized. Now, if the councillors were really representing the voices of the poor, then why is it that so much of inequality has been growing in the city? And why have slums grown like this, where they don't have even water supply and drainage, and their garbage is never picked up, and they don't have proper housing? You saw the kind of housing the migrants were living in, the actual builders of the city, the construction workers. What have the councillors done to bridge the gap between the influential people, who are influencing policy at the highest levels? They have an open door to meet all the biggest, policy makers. They're invited for luncheons and dinner parties, and the poor who are supposed to voice their, needs at the area sabha level, at the ward committee level, that has never been allowed. And so the councillors who are supposed to be listening to them have never given them a voice. And they have been usurping their voice and taking the votes from the poor, but working in favor of the rich. So that is how you have this totally non-inclusive, unsustainable city. So I think that the whole premise needs to be questioned. And unless you stop investing, in this mega infrastructure in Bangalore, there is no solution for this city. And the councillors, in what way have they helped to bring about sustainability in their wards? Because they have not created the water and sewerage networks that need to be created for the poor, which is causing the water pollution, which is going into the lakes. And also there is a court order saying all your garbage has to be processed locally in every ward, so that you don't send your garbage out anywhere. Which councillor has even implemented that? In how many wards do we have the local processing systems for garbage? And where is the housing? And where is the last mile connectivity that I spoke about earlier? It would reduce the demand for all these high-end infrastructure that is happening in the city, which the councillors are promoting. The elevated corridors, the flyovers, catering to a small section of private car owners, while the majority don't have, a bus to which they can link with the last mile connectivity, or they don't have proper footpaths, they don't have proper, roads to walk on. So I really question what the policy makers have been doing, and also what the councillors have been doing to bridge and to make this whole city sustainable, and not only sustainable, but also inclusive. When you are non-inclusive, it leads to a lot of unsustainable solution. Like Indira Gandhi, I think, said poverty is the biggest polluter or whatever. So unless you look at the, uplifting the poor and giving them proper housing and proper living conditions and working conditions, I don't see that this city is going to improve. So, and also you have to look at the entire state in its entirety, in the sense, what is happening to the rest of Karnataka because of the gross investment that you are doing only in the city of Bangalore. And why are the migrants coming here in the first place, from the Kalyan Karnataka or from the tier 2, tier 3 cities? Because you're not investing anything there. When you compare the levels of investment that is happening in Bangalore and in the other cities, the councillors and the MLAs are thinking of an elevated corridor for about 40,000 crores in Bangalore, whereas they are not willing to spend even 2,000 crores in Kalyana, Karnataka every year, and which is what is propelling the migrants from, the poor migrants also are coming here. It's not only the global investors who are coming. And so this totally skewed development, when you look at entire Karnataka, also has to be taken into account, as also Mr. Samir has been pointing out, that you have to look at the entire ecosystem of the state and not just of the city. And I know also that Mr. Gaurav Gupta was chairman of the BWSSP, and even at that time, there was no plan to, incentivize use of the local water, in recycling systems and dual, piping systems and so on. And they're always talking about bringing water from Kaveri or from even Yattina Hole or wherever, And so that whole premise needs to be rethought. That's what I feel.
No, thanks. Thank you, Katyayani ma'am, to bringing in this very important piece of aspect around inclusion. I think while we spoke about the person who came in and set up Third Wave Coffee Roasters as someone who's come in and is integrating to the vision of Bangalore, it's equally relevant to discuss about the metro worker who's come in from probably Jamshedpur
Yes.
and Jharkhand and needs to get integrated to the vision of Bangalore, right? And how inclusive are we? I think that's a fairly, sobering thought to sort of end the conversations and inputs. I'm afraid I think it has raised much more questions than the answers that I'd hoped for, but that's always a good thing, right? I mean, we have a bunch of questions that we can go after. We can hopefully continue the conversation at various levels and dimensions and take that conversation forward. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I want to give the last 2-3 minutes to my colleague Srini. Over to you, Srini, if you are able to show us a kind of a visual translation to what we have spoken about today, and does that give us an idea about the questions that I'm talking about. Over to you, Srini.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll just take a little moment to just share my screen. So my iPad screen is shared. You can just focus on that. Yeah, you can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay, one second. So yeah, so thank you for the conversations. It was really amazing, a lot of amazing viewpoints and all. So I attempted to capture, because there's a lot of diverging viewpoints, so kind of bringing it all together on like one small screen was kind of a challenge in itself, like almost like a citizen. I'll just go over like some of the things that we captured, right, in a way that like basically there's a way of lack of like serious political will to kind of change and bring into that like a decentralized governance, which can be like actually effective in that way, right, and gives autonomy to people. So all these issues were captured, like people losing out, then lack of a centralized database, like all these disruptive changes. How can we actually bring a citizen participatory governance into the picture, right? So that to urban ward level decision making. Then a lot of problems as such are there in inherent citizen, like flouting norms and regulations. What do we do with those kind of thing? Then misaligned public and private interests, the scale and variety people talked about. So then there are these floundering plans of the government, closed systems, incomplete contracts. So there are a lot of problems on the top here. While there's a plan for a kind of a vision for a resilient cities of the future, city of aspirations, all this is very well here, but the lack of vision and how we get about a vision is kind of captured here. And then what happens with these kind of closed systems is that there's no kind of autonomy, and then guided by personal interests. I captured that a little bit. Then Mr. Gupta also spoke about, there are serious challenges in of a burgeoning city, knowledge building, all this thing is there. So we captured a bit of that. All these things factor into actually building a resilient city. Then Samir talked about, like inclusive, like ecological design, like, climate change is actually a very complicated issue with many factors, but Bangalore is positioned well. So we have this crossover of rights and responsibilities that we should think about. So all that I captured here a little bit. Then basic thing coming out of there is, can we build with nature instead of against it, kind of thing, right? So then there's this, so basically ultimately leading to this final issue that we need to design some sort of, one second. I mean, the city has it's as our common values, right? So everything has to be factored into building our commons. But like that was the most important question to end with, was like, are we actually, is it an infinite growth situation? It cannot be, right? So somewhere a balance has to be struck. And most important thing is kind of, we cannot have a non-inclusive city. And like, there's a serious disconnect like between the bureaucrats, like, this blessing here on top and citizens being able to govern something. I feel that balance has to be there, and the common man, basically it has to be an inclusive city, which really needs to be questioned. So I think I wanted to leave it with that kind of a question mark towards the end.
Fantastic, Srini. This is phenomenal. I think you've been able to put the essence of this in one whiteboard, all the key questions and the challenges, like I said, I think, but hopefully integrated way for us to think forward, right? I mean, we have one sort of storyboard over here, which captures this conversation. And I think this will be useful for us to take some of these parallel conversations ahead on some of these questions. Thank you, Srini, so much. Unfortunately, we've run completely out of time. And on that note, on that visual journaling note, I would like to thank, first of all our panelists, Mr. Gaurav Gupta, Katyayani Chamraj, Dr. Champakar Raj Gopal, and Samir Sisodia. Thank you so much for those rich insights. I know that I think there are lots of action points and conversations to take up from here, but I do believe that I think this has added a lot of context, at least to this conversation around our city, around community participation, and definitely around looking at the climate change lens as well. I would also like to thank all the participants who viewed this panel discussion. Thank you all for being with us through these 1.5 hours. And thank you to the organizers of this Innovate for Cities conference for giving us this opportunity. My best wishes and good luck for the rest of this conference as well. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vikram.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram.
Thank you.
Thank you.